Hi everyone and welcome to a brand new video. Today we have a new mysterious case and well, I must confess something. You guys ask me all the time which has been the most difficult case. You leave me a lot of questions that have always had different answers. But I think at last in all of my channel's history, I have the case that's been the most difficult for me, and it is this one. You have no idea how much I cry, and I believe I run out of tears, and that's why I won't cry here. But I cry a lot when I was researching it and knowing this story, which is very shocking for me. I think it's important for you to know it too. Also because you suggested a lot, so I decided to do it. Don't forget to follow me on all my social media. You know I have a billion social media accounts. Follow me on Twitch and my second channel, and also subscribe to this one. Okay, now without anything else to say, let's get started. The case of Gabriel Fernandez. Well, I'm going to give you a little summary of Gabriel's life. We don't have a lot of information regarding his life because he was a kid, but I'm going to mention some things broadly so you can get to know him. Gabriel Daniel Fernandez was born on the 20th of February of 2005 in Paulettee, Florida. His parents' names are Arnold Contreras and Pearl Fernandez. His dad, Arnold, was incarcerated because of some petty crimes he had committed. So let's say that from a very young age, Gabriel had to be taken care of by other family members. He was put in custody of his great-uncle, who was homosexual and had a partner called David Martinez. They start raising him and everything's going well. It all goes smoothly and they're with him during Gabriel's first 4 years of life, and everything is fine because they love him a lot. They also gave him everything they could, the life they could give him. Nonetheless, in 2009, his own grandfather appeals that custody because he didn't agree with same-sex relationship. He gained the custody of the child for himself, so Gabriel lived with his grandparents too until 2012. This was something ordinary and he didn't suffer anything bad while being raised by his grandfather. Everything was normal, although the idea this man had regarding the same-sex relationship was very sad. Let's say despite that Gabriel was living a normal life. It was in 2012 when his mother Pearl decided to reclaim his own son custody, and by that time she was in a relationship with a man called Isaro Aguirre, who was her partner. They gave her the custody back despite everything and despite her family having taken the custody away from her in the first place, for they thought that he would be somewhat in danger, given that she had kind of a violent past, including petty crimes. Well, things were a little complicated, but in the end, you know that the law highly prioritizes the mother so they can give her the custody back once again. Regarding the life, the disposition of Gabriel, he was a really sweet kid. They describe him as a very tender and intelligent boy. He also did very well in school, and sometimes he got awarded with medals, like the ones they give in school for his good grades and his excellent results. He also remembered very clear that oftentimes his mother wouldn't show up to his ceremonies to help him, be there for him, or congratulate him. She didn't go, so he felt a little sad. Despite everything, he was really smart, had some friends with whom he had fun, and they were very close. But this began to change slowly. Gabriel became a little shyer, and they didn't understand why. They just let him be. He sometimes just didn't want to go out to the recess, so the teacher assigned him a little task so he could stay inside the classroom. But yeah, he was slowly withdrawing. In a moment, I'm going to go into more detail about this topic so you understand the reasons, but I think it's time for us to talk about the facts of this case and to understand his story more deeply. It all begins with a 911 call, which I will play now.
911 emergency.
Yes, I would like to, my son is not breathing.
Your son is what? He's not breathing.
As you can see, his mother calls 911 saying his son is not breathing, and then his dad, or well, his stepdad, also calls the police.
My son is 8 years old.
It's your son, okay. And he's not breathing?
No.
Does he have a seizure?
No, he was wrestling on my other side, and I came in and he just was unconscious.
What he states is that indeed the child is not breathing. He's unresponsive. He said he was playing with his brother and then hit himself with something, which left him unconscious. The police arrived to the place where everything happened. Obviously, let's say that this man, the stepfather, Isauro, tries to perform CPR constantly, but isn't able to bring him back to life. And then the police arrived. They start trying to reanimate him and take him in an ambulance to the hospital. When Gabriel arrives there, they try to keep him alive for a couple of days, but in the end, he suffers brain death and passes away on the 24th of May of 2013, 2 days after being admitted. But what starts to happen here? The nurses, the doctors, and everybody begins to realize that this case doesn't really involve just a kid that was playing with his brother, then got hit, lost consciousness, and died. But it's something that goes beyond any of that. They start performing the mandatory autopsy on the kid because, as we know, it allows for the real cause of death to be revealed. And this is very particular because this is one of the longest autopsies that the person who had to perform it had to do. This man spent 2 days doing it, while normally he will take half a day. But he had to take 2 days to perform it because of the amount of things he found in the kid. Among these things, and because there are so many, I can tell them to you one by one. But some of the most important things he had was a depressed skull fracture, cranial dents, burns in one side of his throat, and he had missing skins, bruises and cuts in his face. He also had what seemed to be scars and signs of pellet shots or some kind of shots caused by a pneumatic weapon in his chest and groin. He also had several cigar burns throughout his body, several broken ribs, burns in other parts of his body. His hands were quite swollen, among many other things. You can also imagine the state of the child. I don't want to enter into details, so fingers crossed the video doesn't get demonetized, but he had many things. So one can ask, what happened to Gabriel? What did really happen in this case? And before I give you a lot of details about this, I want us to know the two persons who lived with Gabriel during his 2 last years of life, or less than the last year, which were Isauro and his mother, Pearl. Isauro Aguirre, also known as Tony Aguirre, was born on the 3rd of August of 1980. It is said that he failed 2 school years and that's the reason why he left it. It seemed since that moment that he had a certain learning difficulty, but he moved on with his life without studying. After that, he began working when he was 20 or 21 years old in a place called Woodland Park Retirement Hotel, which is a sort of nursery home, a retirement home, in which he helped all these people, the elderly. He took care of them and he was also a driver. According to the people who worked with him, he was a very calm person, very helpful. Actually, he was always really attentive to the necessities of the people who were in that home. And he gave his best all the time. He was a tender person, very nice and always obliging. He was that kind of a person. The residents even remember that oftentimes he will take them out for a drive in his car. He will take them to open fields, show them the nature, explain things to them. It seemed like it was a nice relationship and everybody quite liked him. It is also said that during his childhood he was a normal kid. A kid who didn't have many things, unlike others. He was very loving, he took care of his sister because he also had a sister, and was also a person who never had any criminal record. It was even said that when he was young, he had been an altar boy at one church. He liked going there regularly. He also had some girlfriends before Pearl, and those girlfriends always said that he was nice during their relationship, that he always was a good person, very respectful towards them, and never had any problem that would indicate something strange. That's all regarding Isauro, so you can get to know him more, confronted with his past and what the people say. Now we'll focus on Gabriel's mother, named Pearl Cynthia Fernandez. She was born on the 29th of August in 1983. Her parents were Robert and Sandra Fernandez. Unlike Isauro, she did have a more catastrophic past in many senses. Her dad says she went in and out of prison all the time, which was something ordinary for them. They also say that her mom didn't show much affection for her either. She didn't love her, she hit and insulted her too. And that caused that Pearl, being really young, started to consume certain types of drugs and alcohol. When she was 11, she decided to run away from her home. I mean, imagine that, it's a very young age for this kind of things. She became an addict to this substance and also dropped out of the school when she was 8. After that, she states that when she was more or less a teenager, when she was kind of 16 years old, his uncle tried to abuse her. There was also a moment in which various men held her for a time and took turns to abuse her. After that incident, she obviously fell into a severe depression and had many suicidal thoughts. Despite that, she got her life together after that. Then is when she met Arnold, who's the person with whom she has Gabrielle. Additional to that, they have 3 more children. This is when the sad story towards Gabrielle starts. What happened is that just when he's born, she abandons the baby only 3 days after his birth. She abandons him in a hospital, she runs away, and that's when happened the custody, which I told you in the beginning about Gabriel. The custody passes to his great uncle and went all that story. Clearly, after many years, she was diagnosed with a lot of problems and mental disorders, such as depressive disorder, developmental disability, learning disability, among other things, like personality bipolar disorder and PTSD after what happened to her. She, unlike Isauro, had some criminal and abuse charges filed against her by her ex-husband Arnold. She was also known by people and her family to be a problematic person. She was a complicated person, and that's the reason why, when the moment came, when she wanted to take back Gabriel's custody, her family tried to refuse. And they refused before many instances, but in the end, nothing happened because the law ruled in favor of the mother of the child. So these are the stories regarding Gabriel, Isauro, and Pearl. I wanted you to know them a little bit so then we can go into detail about what really happened with Gabriel. The truth behind this case is that for me, it was really the most painful. It breaks my soul. This is too sad, but basically what happened was that Gabriel was abused and hit during 8 months since they gave the custody to his mother. During 8 months, his own mother and the dad, well, the stepdad, systematically tortured the kid in a horrifying way. He received many physical blows, abuses, and all kinds of tortures that for me are acts that I cannot conceive in my mind. How is a person able to do that? There were clearly many things that were apparent in the autopsy, such as how he suffered when they put out cigars using him. I mean, how they basically use him as an ashtray. They also hit him constantly. After there were some trials that, well, in a moment I'm going to tell you about that topic, it was said that they tied him up even for whole days to a piece of furniture that was beside their bed. They even left him sleeping inside that piece of furniture. Sometimes they tied him up, cuffed him to it, and he couldn't go or walk around the house at any given time. He was there all the time. Also, his family, well, his parents starved him. They practically gave him leftovers or something from the trash, but on many occasions, they also forced him to eat the cat's litter because they also had cats. Additional to that, they shot him with a pneumatic weapon. Occasionally, they locked him with a bathtub and sprayed him with a pepper spray without allowing him to come out. All this was progressive abuse, which was very hard for the kid. But now I want to start talking about how this case was progressing. I think what is shocking about this case is that everything could be prevented and it wasn't. It's quite astonishing that when the police arrived at the crime scene, when they saw that this kid wasn't really playing with his brother, they launched an investigation and found inside the house a number of ugly things. Among those things was the piece of furniture I talked about. There were piles of clothes, trash, and the most astonishing of all was the amount of blood that they found in all the house. One of the police officers, one of the scene investigators, was attaching a red cord to each mark of blood there was in the house, and it came to a point in which she ran out of the red cord, so she had to change to a yellow one. So imagine the amount of blood that there was in the house, left there because of 8 months of beatings directed to the kid. The parents, when everything happened, didn't leave the ambulance with him, which is something very unusual for a case like this. That's when everything became quite suspicious and the truth began to be discovered. The people, after they found out about Gabriel's death, were very shocked. For them, it was a shock, specifically for his family, because they didn't want him to be with that woman during that time, for they knew what kind of a person she was. Nonetheless, it started to be discovered that apparently at the end of Gabriel's life, what happened was that this man, Isauro, was the one who killed him. He started hitting him. They said he hit him around 10 times in his skull, and that's when he didn't regain consciousness anymore. According to the other children, because as I told you, Pearl had 3 more kids, they talked about what happened with his brother and say that they remember that day, just when he stopped responding, Isauro told them that that they had to say that they were playing with him and that he had fallen. But obviously these children started telling everything that happened to Gabriel, everything that was done to him, and also their helplessness to not be able to defend him, for they could live the same consequences. But what happened here? The key to everything is something very shocking from the beginning of this abuse towards Gabriel. It is that supposedly his mom and Isauro thought that the boy was gay. So according to what his brothers told, this man started to hit him, as did his mom, saying repeatedly that he was gay. That was their excuse to do it. Many people say that obviously at that age it's impossible to tell if he was or not, but they say that maybe for he lived so much with his great uncle, and given that he was a very delicate boy, in some respects, they thought he was gay. But it is very shocking. Imagine having 4 kids but only one being beaten in that way and tortured during months. As I told you, they found a lot of evidence that incriminated their parents without a doubt. Among that, they found the pepper spray I mentioned, they found a baseball bat which they often used to hit him, the pneumatic guns they used on him on many occasions, some boots with the steel points which he also used to beat the child, and even cables with which they tried to asphyxiate him. Even in the autopsy, you can see he has the neck very bruised because of all these reasons. Besides that, cat litter everywhere. In the autopsy, they found traces of cat litter in his stomach, so imagine that. And now is when the trials of this case begin, which is kind of the most shocking of everything, for then is when all the information that composes everything I've told you is revealed. Obviously, they show pictures of him which demonstrate what this boy lived, but they also find something more shocking in this case besides the death of the kid. As I told you, there was a point in which he began to isolate himself from his friends. He was a very sociable kid, but slowly he started to withdraw. He even stopped going out to recess, and that had a reason. Many people testified on those trials, and one of them was his teacher. As I've told you, there was a moment in which he started to isolate himself from his friends. He didn't want to go out to recess. He preferred to remain alone, and this was due to some consequences. Since the beginning of certain months, Gabriel started arriving to school with notorious things of abuse, which were physically evident. His teacher noticed that clearly, but one of her first reactions was when one time he asked her, when everybody had left the school, if it was normal that your mother hit you with a belt, especially with the metallic part which is common in belts, if it was normal to bleed, so the teacher was quite shocked from then on. She took the initiative to call, I don't know what is called to your countries, but it's like Child Protection Services, kind of that entity that protects the children from abuse, among other things. She decided to call them and report that case. Obviously, that entity went to Gabriel's house and they started reviewing the abuses the child was suffering. But what happened? They didn't see anything. It was like the mom was saying no, that he hit himself, that he was a liar, and so on. That's as far as the complaint went. However, what happened? When the teacher called Child Protection Services, so to call them, he often arrived in worse shape than ever. She especially remembers an occasion in which he arrived very beaten. She decided to call Child Services. The boy missed the school for 13 days and then came back with very evident signs of violence. Even here, there were some pictures that she took because it was Mother's Day, in which you can see that he has some bruises and even some blood clots and things inside his eye. That was a big part of the evidence that showed he was being abused. So she keeps reporting the case, but Child Services don't seem to do much, really. And what happened? He started withdrawing. He arrived very beaten, really. It was so bad that his own classmate stared at him, astonished, asking what happened. And as he didn't talk much about the situation, it became a very concerning topic. What happened then, he also started to become a little bit more aggressive towards his friends and her teacher. He replied more strongly and was always ready to fight, as they said, for obvious reasons. There was something very interesting that was found in the autopsy when he died. The thing was that we all have a gland that, if I'm not mistaken, is called the thymus. We all have that gland here, towards the center of the chest. But him, when one is a child, the gland is a little higher up, more towards the throat. And this gland has a specific weight and size according to your age. What the doctor that performed the autopsy found was that Gabriel had a very reduced, almost inexistent gland. This denoted that he was suffering from skyrocket levels of stress and anxiety. So imagine that. He also had moments in which he begged the teacher not to let him return home because he didn't want to go there. I don't know what to think, which side to take, but honestly, I wouldn't let him go home, you know? After he arrived the first time beaten, I wouldn't have let that kid go. But of course, everyone makes their choices. It must be a really difficult situation with those kind of children all the time, and one can go solving those things because there's also the parents. One doesn't know what consequences one can elicit given that they are abusive. There are so many contexts that we wouldn't know what to do, really. But with all this, after Gabriel dies and they find this reality, the parents are evidently found guilty and convicted. They are arrested one day before he passes away. They're not arrested just the moment he dies because since he arrived, the doctors knew there was something stranger that would appear to be happening. When he dies, they charge it with first-degree murder of the child. What happened in this particular case? It was one of the few cases in which the Los Angeles attorney asked adamantly for the death penalty for both of them. His mother, Pearl Fernandez, decided to accept all charges to avoid precisely the death penalty. But it was very curious because in the trials they obviously show all the images, they talk about the case, and it was like both of them didn't feel anything. They were emotionless, just started at a blank point. Nothing more, like simply, yeah, that happened, no one tear, nothing. When the mother was convicted, she pronounced some words saying, "I want to say that I'm sorry for what happened. I wish Gabriel was alive. Every day I wish I had made better choices. I'm sorry for my kids and I want them to know that I love them." In the end, she's convicted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. This seems to me a just sentence, definitely. She's now in the Central California Women's Facility. In 2021, she presented an appeal, but they didn't accept it. There are several rumors that say that since the first moment she's been in prison, there's obviously have been many inmates that have tried to make her life impossible, torturing her, trying to make her live some of what her son felt. You know, or I don't know if you know, but generally the persons who murder or abuse kids in jail suffer terrible consequences at the other inmate hands. They think that's one of the worst crimes, and I do too. Generally speaking, the persons who are convicted for that have a really hard time behind bars. On the other hand, Aguirre had a trial that took so much time too. And it wasn't until 2018, a lot of time passed in trials, and in between then, he was still in jail. But after all these trials, at last, let's say that, after a long time, because it's really complicated for a judge to accept the death penalty, due to a lot of laws and many things, and because they really have to analyze the reasons, well, he at last is sentenced to the death penalty by the state of California. At the present, he hasn't still served his sentence. The death penalty process is a lengthy one. I mean, decades could go before he serves the sentence because of the changes in the law, among other things. People who can, or like people who die annually to death sentences, are very limited. I mean, I don't know the percentage, but imagine that. I don't know. They can only serve the death sentence for 10 people per year. So that's why there are many cases of death sentence convictions that hadn't been served yet. I don't know, from my perspective, for the real conviction, I would have preferred a life sentence, for I feel that to end their lives is too easy. They just relieve themselves for the responsibility of their crimes. But I also think that the amount of time he's going to spend in jail until he serves his sentence is also going to be great torture for him, knowing that eventually he'll die thinking about that. Why was he sentenced with the death penalty and she wasn't? 1, because she pled herself guilty, and 2, also because according to investigation, he was the author of the blows that caused the death. And also, many of the tortures the kid was subjected were given by Isauro. There were many opinions coming from Pearl's family in which they say that it was almost certain that she was the instigator, that she influenced a lot of Isauro's decision. As I told you, he had a normal life before Pearl. He didn't have a criminal record and was a person that was even cataloged as a very kind and peaceful. But it seemed that since being with Pearl, he changed radically. And her family says that the ability to persuade and manipulate people that she had was very high, so she probably managed to influence him that way. Besides the hate speech about the boy probably being gay, among other things that led him to make these choices, probably influenced by her, so everything ended up as it did. There was a conversation that they had in jail before all this process. This was also one of the conversations that sank them deeper. It was one in which he asked him like, well, and what did you say? Like trying to agree so their versions match, and they didn't get caught, but obviously the guilt was logical due to all the evidence. Besides all that, it is really shocking what this little boy had to live during 8 months. I find it really painful. I mean, really, for one to be born and have that life and this golden life. I mean, I don't know if it's a goal, I don't know what it is, but the fact that his life was just that is very painful. This case hurt me a lot, but what's even more painful is what happened surrounding this case. Here we're going to talk about the real issue. This is not a case about the theories like, so they kill him because he was gay. Well, that's related, but there's a bigger problem behind all that, and it was, for example, the amount of times the teacher called child services to denounce the case and absolutely nothing happened. There's even a man that remembers that on some occasion Pearl and the boys arrived at an office. I think it was an office related to some bank affairs or something like that. And this man saw the kid very beaten, and even Gabriel made him a sign. He says he didn't know if he pointed to his mom or if he pointed to his face. So people saw his injuries like alerting them of the situation. When the man told his partner that because he didn't really work there, he told his partner to please denounce the case and to help, so her boss would work on that case. The boss just replied, like, no, not today, I don't want to pay the extra hours, we're about to leave, so we're not announcing anything. So that's when you see that there's a very concerning problem in the system. This is one of the first cases that obviously child services didn't want to get big and known, not even resolved. Within this topic, clearly after all the complaints and the convictions, the attorneys also asked for all the people related to this case in child services to be processed. From the person who went to the boy's house after the complaints and saw everything and didn't do anything to that person's boss. I mean, in the end, there were 4 people involved in this, but sadly, they were absolved after some time. What's really problematic here is knowing that they didn't do anything. They decided to trust the mom, even after they saw the many signs of abuse. They saw with their own eyes how the kid was beaten, clearly asking for help, and seeing the number of denouncements the teacher had interposed. I don't remember the number exactly, but she interposed many denouncements for aggression and nothing was done. The accusations coming from the kid were very sensitive. He really went and told his teacher what his parents did to him, and it was horrible. It was like, today they shot me with a pneumatic gun, today they hit me. I mean, there were things that would make you ask, what is happening? Obviously, if I were the teacher, I wouldn't have let the kid go. But anyway, that's a different discussion. However, this case does shed light on the way the processes are being handled within the jurisdiction of the Child and Family Protective Services, and how it was important to pay close attention to how the system was working. What the people from social services or child services, however you want to call it, say is that it was very difficult to handle the case. How to explain this? It's basically that one person, more or less, was in charge of around 200 cases from different children. So that this person did was just they didn't know how to handle the cases. The person went, tried to solve it, but had to go in that moment to solve another. The workload was insane for the people within the Child and Family Services entity. So it was very complicated to keep tabs on everything. So there are a lot of things. I think the problem is focused on the big powers, because they didn't hire enough companies that could be dedicated to this, enough employees, enough hiring processes. In the end, everything has to do with an economical issue. With them trying not to spend, with reducing budgets, not paying extra hours, well, all these topics that especially in the USA are sensitive because everything's expensive. What happened? It was really sad that they discovered other similar cases just after GABRIEL's, like they didn't learn the lesson. Other kids, for example a kid called Anthony Avalos, a 10-year-old, lived almost exactly the same as GABRIEL. They refused to let him go to the bathroom, to eat, very similar abuses and tortures. Many similar calls were made by many people around him, and it was even said that he was abused and beaten because supposedly he was also gay. The boy also died under these conditions. Later, it was discovered that around 150 more children had died in those last months, in similar ways with signs of abuse that were really alike to GABRIEL's. Also, the Child Services Department had been involved, just like with our case. Clearly, the family was unable to do much after the death of GABRIEL. There was only first conviction. They obviously tried to make the government pay attention to this topic of how they didn't do anything, how sometimes they prioritize the mothers when the custody is at stake, when they really don't know if those women are apt for that. His biological father, which surely you're asking what happened with him, remained in prison at that time. He's not in jail anymore, but given that in that moment he was still behind bars, it was a really difficult time for him. And he regretted a lot not being able to be for his son, not being able to raise him, not being able to see what life he deserved. He constantly testified that he thought of him, that he had nightmares, and that he wasn't able to sleep. He interposed his own lawsuit against Isaro, against Pearl, and against the agent of child services. What is said is that he's already has another family and other children, and some people have seen him on Facebook. He was even working in the business of tattoos. It's like he became a tattoo artist. That's kind of the last that was known about him. In itself, this case for me was really hard. Most of my research, I did it watching the Netflix documentaries. For those who don't know, for those who haven't watched it, if you want to dive deeper and cry a lot like me, go and watch the documentary. It is called The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez. I recommend you to watch it. It's also a great documentary and it's very well made. It has everything you will expect regarding the information, and I can also imagine that it has a lot more details because obviously it has 6 episodes which are 6 hours. Here I made a summary of everything I watched and I also found of my internet research, but I recommended that you watch it because it's really well made. I must warn you because it has the unedited images of the body. It shows everything. That's so you know and have precaution and discretion when you watch it. It is very sad, very shocking. I cried a lot watching this boy suffering, watching his family speaking, watching his teacher. This case makes me feel helpless. Now I really swear this is the most difficult case I've ever done in all my life. And it is because of everything. I mean, feeling that he didn't deserve that, being so young, feeling how unjust some things were, the detachment of the other people for what happens to others. I don't know, it's very difficult case. But well, I wanted to relate it to you here. I hope you like it a lot. If so, don't forget to like the video, thumbs ups, and comment what do you think. How do you feel about the case, your ideas, everything you can think of. I hope you watch the documentary and come back here to tell me what you thought of it. Don't forget to follow me on my social media, you know I have 1 billion social media accounts, and most importantly, subscribe to my channel and activate the notification bell so it lets you know when I upload new videos. And that's all for the video, thank you so much for watching me, follow your dreams, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye!